Last week, Roger talked about the Columbo tactic in regards to defending the faith, and I'm just going to go over a few things in regards to that. We noticed that, Columbo, if any of you remember Columbo, he was always, he acted like a real dummy, but he was a pretty smart guy. Always say, well, what do you mean by that? Or, as he was walking away, he would always turn back around and he'd say, sir, one more question. He always said one more question. But we're going to talk about what do you mean by that? And this question accomplishes 5 important objectives. One, it immediately engages a non-believer in an interactive way. And it flatters the non-believer because it shows genuine interest in his or her view. And that's one thing that I have found that's helpful when we're sharing the gospel, is if people don't feel like you're engaging them in the conversation, you're probably going to not be real successful. And it forces the non-believer to think more carefully and more precisely, maybe for the first time, about the intended meaning. And then it gives you valuable information about the non-believer's exact view. And then it positions the non-believer properly with the burden of proof while placing you in control of the conversation. So when you ask them, well, what do you mean by that? It puts them in a position to have to explain, because a lot of times when you're talking with people like that, they'll just blurt something out. And then if you don't ask them to clarify it, more likely than not, they don't really even understand their position or really understand what they're saying. So be sure to pay attention to the response, and if it's unclear, follow up with more questions. Let me see if I understand you on this. Then repeat the view to make sure that you got it right. Don't let them merely repeat what they said. So, like they said, well, you're intolerant. Well, what does that mean? Put them in a position to have to explain to you what they mean by you're intolerant. And then sometimes this first question is directed at a specific statement or topic of conversation. And then other times the question can be more open-ended. As the discussion continues, gently guide the dialogue into a more spiritually productive direction with additional questions. And the one thing, I guess, that we should always keep in mind when we're sharing the gospel is that it's not a debate, it's not a competition. What it is to get them to the point to understand what the gospel is and to put them in a position to be able to understand it. And so as Peter said, we need to do this with gentleness and with respect. Belittling what they believe or belittling their position isn't going to accomplish much. So just let us all remember that when we are sharing, let us do it with gentleness and respect.
Thank you, Scott. It's very important for us to remember, and these are important ideas that we're hearing about and learning. We want to think about these things because, indeed, we are telling the world Jesus is the only way of salvation. Any other way will not get you salvation, but instead will get you condemnation, and that justly. And so people are probably going to push back against that in a society like ours, where individual preferences and ideas are elevated to the highest level, probably more in our society than maybe anywhere on earth. We feel that's our right. And so when we tell people, you're wrong, which is what we're saying, even if we don't say those exact words, the unbelievers, we're telling them, if you believe that what you're doing is right, then you're wrong if it's not Jesus, because he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. So thank you for that, Scott. It's helpful. Those these strategies, these ideas are to help us keep the conversation going toward clarity of the gospel, as Scott said. And may that be for God's glory, and may He draw sinners to Himself as we have the opportunity to serve Him and tell people the good news of being right with God through Jesus.